Great. Michaela, thank you so much for not only welcoming everybody to this webinar, but also for the work that you did in coordinating with our panelists and speakers, Deb Calvert and Barry Posner. My name is Jon Ferrara, and I'm the CEO of Nimble, and I'm super excited to be here with you today to share with you another of our series of Nimble Growth Hacking about today, how to make extraordinary sales happen in 2018. Now, we all want to be more effective at growing our business, and I think that relationships are critical to that business success, and I truly believe that service is the new sales, that if you go into every relationship with the intent to help that other person grow, that you can't help but be successful. And today's speakers are going to talk about how to create value at every step of the buyer's journey by connecting meaningfully with buyers in order to succeed in creating mutually beneficial, measurable goals. And so I'd like to introduce to you Deb Calvert and Barry Posner. Can you guys say hello and good morning?
Hello and good morning.
Hi, this is Barry Posner. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening.
So Deb Calvert is a dear friend of mine that we built and nurtured a relationship over years across our areas of commonality of shared purpose is helping other people grow. She is the president of People First Productivity Solutions, a sales and leadership development training consulting firm that focuses on building organizational strength by putting people first. She's also the author of Discover Questions, Get You Connected, and is one of the top 20 most highly rated sales books of all time. Deb, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks, Jon. My pleasure.
And Barry is the professor of leadership and former dean of the Levy School of Business at Santa Clara University. He is an accomplished scholar. He provides leadership workshops and seminars worldwide. And with his co-author, Jim Kozes, Barry wrote the award-winning best-selling book, The Leadership Challenge, that sold over 2 million copies worldwide in almost 22 languages. And what I love about the work that Barry and Jim have done over years is they've studied the sales process and people who buy and people who sell. And they've poured that thought leadership and that knowledge into a series of books. And today, we're going to talk about a new book. Deb, take us away.
Okay, thank you, Jon. I really want to be sure to thank you and Nimble, and also Michaela and Jenna, because they did a lot of work behind the scenes to bring this together. Jon, I have to tell you and everyone listening that I especially appreciate Nimble's focus on improving human-to-human connections, right? By creating a personal CRM that puts people first, you're keeping current with what works for sellers and with what's preferred by buyers. And I do think that's what we have in common. The research project that Barry and Jim and I embarked on and the book that we wrote do exactly that. Today, what Barry and I would like to talk about comes directly from our original research and our brand new book, Stop Selling and Start Leading. With most of the people here either being business owners or coming from a sales background, I think it would be safe to say that we all know what buyers do not want from sellers. Most of us in selling have experienced buyer pushback, resistance, or even disdain when it comes to traditional seller behaviors and activities. What's less clear is what those buyers do want from sellers. And that's why we embarked on this project, knowing that buyers were dissatisfied and sellers were unclear about what buyers wanted. We researched our hypothesis that buyers might respond differently to leadership behaviors than they have been responding to traditional sales behaviors. So after we describe our research, give you a little bit of background and our findings, we'll talk about you, whatever your role might be, you as a seller, and how you can shift your approach and your behaviors in a way that will positively differentiate you from other sellers, from your competition, and make you more effective in connecting with buyers and in closing more sales. What we're going to do is share an evidence-based framework of leadership, the one that comes from that 30+ years of work that Jim and Barry have done. And this framework of leadership that we now know, according to buyers, provides us an ideal behavioral blueprint for sellers. Stop Selling and Start Leading is absolutely packed with seller stories, along with buyer research. And we had heard all that research out there about buyer dissatisfaction, same as you have. And we were also very sensitive to seller dissatisfaction. One of the sellers who shared a story with us captured an underlying disappointment that a lot of sellers have been feeling in recent years. For Amy Spellman, being a seller carried some unexpected negative feelings. She entered into selling, and the work that she thought she was supposed to do didn't feel quite right to her. She was disappointed and ultimately unable to continue in sales because she thought she had to adopt a stereotypical persona and become something other than herself. And I know, because I work with a lot of sellers, I know a lot of sellers out there feel just like Amy. Sellers want to see themselves differently from this stereotype, and they want to feel good about the work that they're doing. And of course, sellers want opportunities to succeed and to simultaneously help their buyers in meaningful ways. So we know what sellers want. But there hasn't been clarity and consistency in the answers offered to answer this question. What do buyers really want? When it comes to interactions with sellers, what is it that buyers want? What do buyers want sellers to do? It seems that we all have sort of a general sense about this, but we don't have concrete, clear, consistent actions that we can take. You know, we've been hearing messages all about how we're supposed to be connecting meaningfully with buyers. That's been around for a while. And maybe you've experienced something like this too. You probably know in your own business that we could all be continuing to do the work of selling that we've always done. And we could even add in some new bells and whistles, automation using all the tools in your stack, pipeline management, keep on grinding it out, compete on price. We could put all of that in the first option bucket and keep trying to get to those buyers first, fastest, and ahead of our competitors. Or, thank goodness there's a choice, or we can give buyers an experience, an awesome connecting experience, so that they will choose proactively to come to us. They would choose us as the sellers they want to do business with, and they'd stay loyal to us because of this connecting experience that we give to them. But even this statement, as accurate as it sounds, and as much as it probably resonates based on what you've experienced with your own buyers, even this statement doesn't really tell us what to do. In fact, I think it raises more questions than it answers. One of the questions that it raises is, okay, so what would this look like? What would an awesome connecting experience entail? And if I'm going to create an awesome connecting experience, what exactly do I have to do? I'd been pondering this question for quite a while, and I'd been looking for answers to this question while I was doing in-field observations with sellers. But I didn't feel satisfied that I was finding an answer. But then something really interesting and really helpful to me caused me to think about this in a whole new way. So I have to go back to give you a little history behind my big aha. For about 2 decades, I'd been working in two worlds, more and more so in the past decade. I was in a corporate role in a Fortune 500, and then later as president of a training and consulting firm. And in those roles, I'd been working extensively in both sales and in leadership development. And for all that time, in my mind, these were two entirely disparate fields, completely separate. So some days I'd wake up and put on my leadership development hat so I could go conduct a workshop or related coaching. And then other days I'd focus exclusively on the work of sales training and sales manager consulting. It was kind of like a toddler's dinner plate. These two things were never supposed to touch each other in my way of looking at them. But then a couple years ago, I was being mentored by Barry, and I was pursuing an accreditation as a certified master of the Leadership Challenge. For those, by the way, who aren't familiar with that body of work, Barry and Jim Kouzes have been working in leadership development their entire careers, and they have put together an evidence-based framework of leadership that's backed by over 30 years of global research with over 5 million people. So that was something that I was very interested in becoming more familiar with, and I was going through this very rigorous certification process, and I was in the phase of that process where I was doing some reflection on the impact of certain leadership behaviors. And I was reflecting on how do these leadership behaviors impact people, those people who might choose to willingly follow or not follow a leader. And then suddenly, literally out of the blue, like a lightning bolt in this moment, it hit me. My two worlds collided. And the question that struck me was, what would happen if sellers exhibited these behaviors that make leaders more effective? And soon after, I couldn't help but wonder, would those leadership behaviors create an awesome connecting experience? Would those behaviors change the way that buyers are responding to sellers? So I took my question to Barry and later to Jim, and we formed the hypothesis that buyers would be more likely to respond if sellers were behaving as leaders. But we couldn't be absolutely sure, so we went straight to the source. We asked buyers. We conducted an original research study through Santa Clara University with 530 B2B buyers in a Qualtrics panel study. And the buyers in this study, well, they were a cross-section of people who participate in all sorts of purchasing decisions in business settings. They came from mid-size and large organizations based in the US and from a variety of industries. Those buyers represented a mix of age groups. Some were sole decision makers with the ultimate authority to make decisions. Others were part of buying teams. For some, sales were routine and repetitive with vendors that they worked with, and for others, their purchases were very complex. But in this study, what we wanted to know was how buyers felt about leadership behaviors. Now, when I say leadership behaviors, these are just some of the examples. There are 30 that we know from Jim and Barry's work, 30 leadership behaviors. These are just some of those examples. Those 30 behaviors have been adapted from the Leadership Practices Inventory. That's an assessment instrument developed by Jim and Barry to measure the extent to which leaders demonstrate exemplary practices of leadership. The LPI, the Leadership Practices Inventory, that was part of their original research on personal best leadership experiences, and we modified it in our research for Stop Selling and Start Leading to reflect a buyer-seller context. So the behaviors of leaders that struck me as highly relevant for sellers came directly from the work that Barry and Jim have done with the Leadership Practices Inventory and behaviors just like these. And as we presented these behaviors to buyers, we asked them about 5 things. We asked them about the current frequency they were observing. For every one of the 30 behaviors, we said, how often do the sellers you already choose to do business with exhibit each of these behaviors? And then we asked them, well, what would be the ideal frequency? How often would you like to see the sellers you do business with exhibiting each of these behaviors? And for all of the 30 behaviors, the ideal frequency was higher than the current frequency they were already seeing. And then we asked them about, of these behaviors, as you look at them, if you saw a seller exhibiting these behaviors more frequently, would you be more likely to meet with that seller? And again, across all 30 behaviors, all these buyers emphatically said yes, they would be more likely to take a meeting with a seller who more frequently demonstrated each of those behaviors. And then we went to the next step. We asked, for each behavior, would you be more likely to buy from a seller who exhibited these behaviors? And again, the answer was yes. Finally, we asked them to rank these behaviors. Which ones would you like to see more frequently, most. So which ones matter most to you? And as we put all of this together and also took open response comments from all of these buyers, what we found was that buyers considered all 30 proven behaviors to be highly desirable. They want to see higher frequency of all these behaviors from the sellers that they work with. And buyers are significantly more likely to meet with and significantly more likely to buy from sellers who exhibit these behaviors more frequently. So in short, we now know. We know exactly what buyers want sellers to do. These 30 specific behaviors are what buyers want us to do. They want us to behave the way leaders do. Now I'm going to turn this presentation over to Barry now, and what he'll be doing is giving you some insights about that original research that he and Jim have been conducting for over 30 years, a little bit more background. And then he'll tell you about this evidence-based framework of leadership that gives sellers the behavioral blueprint based on buyer preferences.
Thanks, Deb. You've done a great job of laying out kind of the reason for getting involved in all of this and where we're going. And just to summarize what you've said, what we've discovered is that buyers want sellers to be leaders. And to the extent that they do that, they're more liable to, buyers are more liable to want to meet with, buy from sellers who exhibit these behaviors. And we've also found, interestingly enough, that it makes a difference in terms of what sellers have to say in terms of how they feel about themselves. You know, we knew we were on to something big, but we wanted to hear a little bit more from sellers in terms of their side of the story. So as part of our research, we asked sellers to tell us about a time when they were at their personal best as a leader. Now, Michaela kind of warmed you up at the top of the hour with this question. We spent a little bit more time with more than 500 sellers who took the time and effort to tell us in more depth about their experiences when they were at their personal best as sellers. And it's interesting because what they told us is very, very similar to what people told us when we put out a call more than 35 years ago when we asked the question, tell us about your personal best as a leader. And what we found in these stories of people who told us about their personal best as leaders and personal best as sellers, well, sellers weren't thinking of themselves in reference to leadership, and yet the behaviors that they engaged in paralleled quite clearly the same behaviors and attributes that people were telling us when they were at their personal best as leaders. So what did we conclude from that part of the study? Well, we concluded that sellers' personal best stories and buyers' preferences are aligned. They were both talking about the same kinds of behaviors that create what Deb described as an awesome connecting experience. And when we can do that, we the buyers, or we the sellers can do that, buyers are going to buy. Not only are buyers going to buy, but sellers are going to feel better about who they are and what they do in that relationship. And finally, we understand that leadership is not a position or a place in the organization. It's really everyone's business, and sellers need to lead, and presumably need to lead more than they're doing these days. Now, I want to spend a few moments and talk with you about, well, what are these? We've been referring to leadership behaviors. Well, what are we talking about? I want to take you through the framework that we've discovered originally when we asked people about their personal best as leaders, but that we rediscovered or reaffirmed when we asked the same question, tell us about your personal best as a seller. What we heard was that people told us about how they modeled the way, they inspired a shared vision with their buyers, they challenged the process, they enabled others to act, and they encouraged the heart. So let me tell you just a little bit about the first three of these, then pass this back to Deb to tell you about the last two, and then we want to get to some of the questions that you might have about this framework and how you can be a more effective seller. Well, when it comes to modeling the way, the important characteristics of people who are modeling the way are these. First of all, they clarify their values. They figure out who they are and what they're about, and they spend time making sure that they're on the same page with their buyers in terms of what it is that they think that is important. And most importantly, they don't just sort of talk the talk. They also make sure that they walk the talk by setting an example, by making sure that, well, to put it in a simple way, they simply make sure that they don't make promises that they can't that they can't keep. You know, we're not just saying this. We found when we analyzed the data that the more sellers were clear about the leadership, their leadership philosophy, their values, what it was that they stood for, it was interesting. There was just a direct correlation between that clarity and the extent to which they were proud to tell others that they were a seller, that they were in sales and where they worked. And they reported being significantly more effective in the jobs that they did. And of course, you know, this is a blinding flash of the obvious when you think about it. If you're not very clear about who you are and what you're doing, well, that comes through directly to the buyer who says, well, what's this person trying to sell me, as opposed to what does this person believe in, and what are they trying to help me to be more successful in doing? So I want to suggest an action that you can take. If this is as far as you get in our conversation this morning, here's the place to begin. The place to begin when you want to become a more effective leader, you want to become a more effective seller, is to make sure that you identify the values that guide the choices and decisions you make. Making sure that, again, that you walk the talk, that you don't just talk the talk. And when you and if you just talk the talk, that's what causes buyers to be cynical. That's what causes all of us to be very skeptical of what anybody's trying to sell us. Well, leaders and sellers told us when they were at their personal best, they modeled the way. But they also told us about how they inspired a shared vision. And when we talk about inspiring a shared vision, we understand that it's about focusing on the future. It's about what tomorrow could look like and how better tomorrow would be if you took these actions, how your long-term interests and needs could be better satisfied by engaging in this path, taking us to the future, than doing something different than that. And again, you know, we keep coming back to the data. We're not just kind of making this up based upon my experience or Deb's experience or a few other people's experiences. The numbers don't lie. What we find is that the more that sellers report that they describe a compelling image of the future to their buyers, that's in fact what they do, they report being more productive in their jobs. And when we talk to buyers, that's exactly what they wanted to hear from the sellers, not what they were selling them today, but what they were selling them today, how that was going to lead them to some better place into the future. And the future really is the domain of leaders, as it is as well the domain of effective sellers. So the action that we think you can take when it comes to inspiring a shared vision, I mean, again, these are, you don't need anybody's permission and you don't need any budget to do these things. What you do need to do to inspire a shared vision, the shared vision, is make sure that you're not trying to sell somebody, this is what I want, and this is what you need to do to make me happy. But rather what you want to do is involve others in crafting a vision, a picture of somehow what could happen if you work together. If you, the seller, worked collaboratively with the buyer, how you both could be better off, but most importantly, how the client could be better served by both of you doing a more effective job. And you need to make sure that this isn't a unilateral process. And again, if we fail to do this, we find ourselves sucked right back into the very negative stereotypes that are portrayed too often in the media about salespeople. Well, I've talked about model the way, inspire a shared vision. Third, practice a set of behaviors that sellers, effective sellers, engage in is called challenging the process. And this practice really has a lot to do with being willing to challenge both yourself and your buyer and thinking about not where you are today, but where you could be in the future. And in order to get to that future, you've got to be willing to experiment, to innovate, to sometimes fail. And the effort's not to fail for the purpose of failing, but rather to ask yourself and ask your buyer, well, what would we have to do in order to be better than we are today? And there's no freeway to the future, so let's experiment. Let's try something out, and let's try something out. And in the true nature of an experiment, the objective of an experiment is to learn. So let's experiment and let's see what it is that we could learn. And the two commitments that define that have to do then with experimenting and learning. And what we find again is that sellers who report that they do that are 4 times more productive. I mean, just think about that. The sellers who are out there, you know, outside of, in some cases, outside of even their own comfort zone, are the ones who are going to be more productive than folks who are just, you know, doing what they've always done. And so the action step for us to think about when it comes to challenging the process is to think about, you know, how do you work with your buyer to set up experiments through market trials or pilot projects or proof of concept demonstrations. The notion is, you know, maybe you're not going to get the big sale right today, but you're going to start in the spirit of in the African proverb that says you can't eat an elephant in one bite. So how do we begin? How do we get started? And challenging the process is a way for us to think about what it is that we can do to get started and to make things happen. Well, there are 2 more practices that we want to talk about, but I want to give this back to Deb and let her take you through enabling others to act and encouraging the heart.
Thank you, Barry. Great overview of Model the Way, Inspire a Shared Vision, and Challenge the Process. This next practice, Enable Others to Act, actually seems to take a lot of sellers by surprise. There's a lot of opportunity within this one practice, though, for sellers who have overlooked or misunderstood this in the past. To enable others to act simply means to involve people, to involve your buyers more, to give them a chance to participate in creating what they want. And the commitments of this practice are to do that, to draw your buyers in by being able to foster collaboration. That's a collaboration where you're working side by side with them and doing some co-creation of insights and solutions with them. As you do, you'll be building trust and deepening that relationship. And the second commitment when you're enabling others to act is to help others develop their competence and their confidence. With our buyers, that means helping them to feel some sense of self-determination that becomes a commitment that enables them to champion what we're asking them to do, even inside their own organizations. If I were to boil these commitments down, one thing that I know for certain this means for sellers is doing less for buyers and doing more with buyers. And when sellers do that, they benefit in a wide variety of ways. For example, when sellers more frequently support their buyers' decisions, then the sellers will feel more effective in the work that they're doing. Enabling others strengthens them, and as we strengthen others around us, we too also end up being strengthened. So giving our buyers this sense of self-determination, when we do that, we're building their confidence and their competence, and they feel more committed to the relationship with us, and they also feel that their imprint is on the solution that we co-create with them. They have a higher degree of ownership. They feel better about the work that we're doing together. In terms of an action item, if you were to take away from this particular practice and just try one thing, here it is. When you're enabling others to act, this is the aim. The aim is to make your buyers feel more powerful and more in control of their circumstances. And that also applies, because you are a leader, it also applies to others inside your own organization, your other partners. When it comes to buyers, this might seem a little bit counterintuitive to the service mentality that we've all seen in sales in the past. But today's service absolutely involves providing an experience to buyers. And that experience is one that makes them feel powerful and in control. So just think about ways that you could modify your own sales approach to involve buyers more in those decisions that are being made along the way. And look for ways that you can get them engaged as active participants in creating what they want. Fifth and final practice is to encourage the heart. The 5 practices of exemplary leadership are: model the way, inspire a shared vision, challenge the process, enable others to act, and this one, encourage the heart. And like enable others to act, this one too is just a little bit puzzling at first for sellers. I think the description of this practice at first may seem like it's more important for managers or for people that we more typically think of when we use that term leaders. But it absolutely does apply to the buying and selling relationship too. When leaders encourage the heart, when sellers encourage the heart of their buyers, they recognize the contributions that are being given by the buyer. They recognize those by showing appreciation for the excellence, the efforts and the excellence, the results the buyers are contributing. And we also would be celebrating our shared values and our victories toward that vision that we're working on together. And we're creating a spirit of community as we do that. To encourage someone means to bolster their courage and buoy their spirits. And that can include praise, recognition, acknowledgement, affirmation, celebration. All of that is wrapped up within this practice. In sales, the simple thank you for your business at the contract signing or the handshake when a sale is closed, that's simply not sufficient. Buyers want to see more frequency of other types of encouragement at other steps in the process. A little bit of data to back this up. As you are encouraging your buyers, you're also letting them know that you have confidence in their abilities. And sellers who do this more frequently rate themselves a whopping 10 times more effective than sellers who do it less frequently. As you can see here, and in all the practices, these behavioral shifts pay big dividends for the sellers who exhibit them more frequently. Here's one more action, one more simple action that you can take. This one will help you to encourage the heart more frequently. A rushed transaction won't afford much opportunity for any of these leadership practices. And you might be overlooking opportunities to encourage the heart if you're not deliberately nurturing an environment and a relationship that makes it natural for doing so. So remember, our ultimate aim is to create an awesome connecting experience for our buyers. And when you create a conducive environment for giving and receiving personalized feedback, you'll also be connecting in ways that you couldn't otherwise. With that, we've taken you through a whirlwind tour, just the high-level overview of the 5 practices of exemplary leadership. We've shown you just a little bit about what you'll find in Stop Selling and Start Leading. And now maybe you can start to see why we call this the behavioral blueprint for sellers based on buyer preferences. I'd like to hand this back to you, Barry, just for a quick summary of the 5 practices.
Well, thanks, Deb. And let me give you an example of encourage the heart. And that's I've noticed that 99% of you who are on this webcast at 10 o'clock are still with us. So enjoy that cup of coffee, and thank you for being a part of this so far. We appreciate it, and we're in the same place that you are, trying to figure out what we can do to help you be more effective. That's our job. If we're selling anything, we're trying to partner with you to ask the question, how can we help you be more effective and be more successful? And we've talked about 5 practices of exemplary leadership. And we've talked about these in as if 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, as if there's some kind of order, but I just want to make sure that you appreciate the fact that this isn't a lockstep operating system. Oftentimes you may develop the relationship with someone through the strength of your encouraging them or enabling them. And as a result of that, they'll want to listen to you as you share with them, and they share with you their vision of how things could be better. And they'll perhaps then be more willing with you to experiment in a way that they might not be willing to experiment with somebody else. And they'll do that because they have a feeling that your promises are ones that you're going to keep, that you actually do model the way. So think about this framework not as 5 separate digits on your hand, but think about how these things all work together. What we know is that in the end, is that buyers want sellers to act more like leaders. And given that truth, then the question is, what does that mean? And what we've tried to give you then is a set of behaviors that leaders engage in that have direct relationship, as Deb has mentioned, have a direct relationship to what it is that you do as a seller. And we also know in the stories that we heard from sellers is that when we're doing these things, not thinking about them as leadership, but thinking about them as our personal best experience as a seller, what we find is that whether we know it or not, what we find is we're behaving just like leaders do. And so leaders and sellers in that sense, they get extraordinary things done when we can replace kind of those stereotypical sales behaviors, change the way we conduct ourselves and the results that we get. And there was a question I noticed earlier in the session that Josh posed that had to do with, well, do I need to change everything that I'm doing and start all over again? And the answer for Josh and others is of course not. But there is clearly a shift in perspective and point of view, and that's what we're hoping to be able to help you to recognize and think about some things that you could be doing differently. So Deb, back to you.
Yeah, let's just, as we take questions, and there are a lot of really good questions here for us, Barry. As we get ready to take some questions, let me just let everyone know what to do next, because if you'd like to get more of what you've been hearing about today, you can do that. First of all, on the next screen, we'll show you a place where you can jot down the link, and I think it's going to be copyable out of your chat area. This is so that you can go get a chapter from the book. We'd like to make that a gift to you for attending this webinar, a free chapter. And if you like what you're hearing, please go buy the book. It is going to be available for release in just 2 weeks, but you can buy it now on any of the major book retailer sites. And most importantly, based on what you've been hearing today, don't wait to do this. When you're selling, in fact, when you're doing anything, think of yourself as a leader. And as a salesperson who is a leader, as a business owner who is a leader, you're going to guide your buyers to exciting new places full of ennobling possibilities where they see something for themselves that they really like. We're going to show you how to do that in Stop Selling and Start Leading. But really, the starting place is you making up your mind, knowing that this is something that you want to do, something that will be valuable to you. I'm just going to leave this slide up here with these links available for you. Nimble's also very generously offered a free trial, and as a Nimble user, I can highly recommend that you check that out. And the chapter is here for you too. Barry, there's so many great questions here. Let me toss one over to you. There's a question here based on, well, there are actually a few that I'll put together. One pertains to insurance agents, one pertains to others who are not direct employees. And the question is, how would we get people motivated to do these things that you're talking about? If they don't report to us, how can we make them do these things?
Well, I'm smiling because, of course, we can't make anybody do anything. We've got to try to get them to want to do something, and it starts just like for a salesperson. It doesn't start with kind of what we want to happen, We need to find out rather from the other party what it is that they want. What would make them, what do they feel would make them more successful? And then the question is, what can I do to help them to get there? I think, if you just thought about this from a design construction point of view, if you're going to build a bridge from your side of the mountain to the other side of the mountain, or the other side of the canyon, you can't really start where you are. You have to start on both sides and meet someplace in the middle. And the same thing's got to be true when you're trying to influence somebody else to, presumably the question is, to do something that they're now not doing.
Well said. I'm going to take this next question. This question is about, what do you do? How do you exhibit these behaviors if you're primarily working through email and voicemail and not one-to-one with individuals? And I think that's a really good question. I have to say that everything we're talking about, leadership, interpersonal relationships, being able to connect with people, create that awesome connecting experience, certainly it is easier when you're face-to-face, right there with someone. But that's not realistic, and no leader is always person-to-person. So what are the ways then that you can make shifts, even when you're working via email, voicemail, phone calls, video chatting, every single time that you interact with someone? How do you
Well, I've lost Deb's voice. How about others?
Yes, Barry, this is Jon Ferrara. First off, I just want to say thank you for this incredible webinar. It really touched my heart in that I really am a firm believer that relationships are the key to your life success, and that what you're talking about in this book is really the basics of business, the follow-up and follow-through that so many sales, quote, professionals haven't been doing since the advent of mass manufacturing and madmen marketing and door-to-door salespeople, that I really believe that sales has become a four-letter word. And I think what you're talking about is really bringing us back to the time where your reputation is based on the promises that you make and the experiences that you deliver, which is almost the pillar of the concept that you and Deb are talking about in Stop Selling and Start Leading. And I love the fact that you're teaching salespeople that they can lead, that ultimately, even if you work for somebody else, you're building your own business within that business. And if you treat it like your business, that you could have incredible success. And I have a couple questions that I saw the audience had shared. Barry, one of them is, do people buying tech solutions respond differently than buyers working with other kinds of sellers?
Jon, thanks for the question. What we found empirically was that when we looked at responses from buyers by industry, we didn't find that there was a difference. When we looked at the only difference that we saw was that actually the more experienced the buyer, so the longer the person had been a buyer, or the more responsibility that person had for making big buying decisions, then the leadership behaviors that we were talking about were even more important than they were to somebody who had very little experience as a buyer or very seldom spent much time in the buying process. So if in the end as sellers we're trying to grow our buyers, then one of the ways that we can do that is by helping them to experience more of this leadership, because part of what leaders do is that leaders turn their followers into leaders. And one of the things I think too many sellers don't recognize is that their buyer needs to internally become a leader, championing the product that the seller's trying to provide, because typically there's more than one person that's got to make that internal decision. And I think sometimes we need to get that buyer on our side so that they can sell internally in ways that perhaps we can't, because we're not invited into the conversations.
Right, exactly. And Barry, I think that if you do what you're talking about in this book, that you'll build that trust and intimacy with that connection that you have in the business, where they will become your advocate, and they'll start bringing you into the rest of the decision makers in order to get that done.
Well, absolutely. I mean, a relationship built upon price is very tenuous.
Yes.
A connection that's built upon a relationship is one that's going to be more durable, because somebody's, the buyer or the buying organization is not going to be, necessarily looking around for the cheapest price. They're going to be looking for a organization and individual that they have confidence in, and shares wanting to make them successful, not just the buyer making the sales organization successful.
Do we have Deb back on the audio? Just checking. Okay. So Barry, there's another question about, is one of the practices of the 5 principles more important than the other?
Well, we're always looking for shortcuts, but I'm afraid that's not the answer. Go back to my analogy of your hand and ask the question, well, which one of those digits do you think is most important? And maybe we have preferences, but the truth of the matter is we do better when we can use all of those digits.
Yeah.
That said, of course, we're more comfortable doing some of these things more than we are others, but we can't somehow say, well, I'm only going to use one finger and not use the rest of my hand.
Barry, if I think about it, my thumb I seem to use a lot of, and the finger next to it. But I really believe that it's the basics that wins games, and I think that the key thing that you started with which is aligning the promises you make and the experience you deliver, that buyers want sellers to exhibit leadership behaviors by following through on commitments and promises they make. For me, that's the pillar, right? That's what a professional is, and I think that's critical to the beginning of the rest of it. What do you think?
Well, I agree. It's interesting when I'm, if I was just doing a presentation or leadership seminar, I will often say, look, the foundation of all of this is built upon credibility. We won't believe, here's what we call, in fact, the first law of leadership. We won't believe the message if we don't believe the messenger. So you can't sell me something if I don't believe you personally, and I don't believe in you. So to your point, this relationship is very important, because it's in the relationship that causes me to listen to what it is that you have to say and believe that what you're saying is the truth as you know it, and is in my best interests.
And I think that too many times salespeople are so interested in doing their pitch, talking about themselves or their products and services. And I really think that buyers don't really want to know about you or your products and services. They want to know how they could achieve their goal. And I think that if you go into a meeting where you've done the homework, you know what that business is about, you know who that person is, and you know what questions to ask, and you ask a few questions and you just shut up and listen and let that person tell you what you need to know in order to help them become better, smarter, faster. You can't help but succeed with which then aligning what you say to exactly what they've told you what their needs are.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not sure we can listen too much. When you think about, I like to think about this analogy. I used my hand, but now let's use my whole body, and we have 2 ears and 1 mouth. And I'm just thinking that the design of that equipment must tell us something about the percentages in terms of how we should be using it.
Amen.
So we should be listening much more than we are telling people or talking.
And with that, Barry, I'd love to have you bring us home with a closing few inspiring words to wrap up this webinar. I want to thank Deb and you for coming. I want to thank the audience for their time. And Barry, take us home.
Well, thank you. And again, my thanks to John, to you, to Nimble, to Michaela, Deb, wherever you are when we get you back, and to all of you that are here on the webinar today or will listen to it on another occasion. We know that that now I'm saying, Deb, Jim, and I, we know that we can't make a difference all by ourselves, and that's the same thing true for all of you as sellers. You can't make a difference all by yourselves. We're in the business of what we call liberating the leader within each person. And the good news is that all the things that we've talked about are things that people are capable of doing. They don't require, years of education. They don't require, leaping over tall buildings in a single bound. They do require a shift in people's attitudes and perspectives and making a choice. Leadership is a choice. And I think when you make that choice and apply it to your jobs as a salesperson, you're going to be more effective.
Well said, Barry.
Welcome back.
We're having an ice storm in Missouri.
So I want to leave you all with one thought. Imagine me in 1986. I was 26 years old, and I was put in a sales position from a systems engineering role, and they told me to go get them. They gave me, quote, leads, which are basically phone numbers of IT decision makers at large corporations in Dallas, Texas, and I had no process. I had my day timer in my pocket. I had a spreadsheet for my forecast. I'd cold call people and put my notes on the piece of paper they handed me, and I thought there had to be a better way. And I transformed myself from a salesperson to a leader in solving my own problem, which turned out to be a problem that millions of people had, by building a solution to help people build relationships at scale. And so before Outlook existed, before Salesforce existed, before the term CRM existed, I built this thing called Goldmine that helped me because I struggled as a salesperson to become a leader, heck, just to become successful. And so for anybody listening to this today, I just want to say that Deb and Barry and myself are here because we truly believe that we're on this planet to help other people grow. I really believe that we grow by helping other people grow, and that if salespeople had that concept going into every sale with the intent to serve and help that person grow, even if it meant recommending an alternative solution than the one they sold, they will be immensely successful in life. And with that, Deb and Barry, thank you so much for adding value to our community today.
A pleasure. Thank you, John.
Good luck and good selling. Bye-bye.